Hello, my name is Wendy Barta, and this is Astrology 101. In part one, we'll be covering the signs, planets, and houses. Don't worry, if you're a new astrology student, we'll explain everything. I hope you enjoy the course. My students often ask me for copies of the material I'm presenting, so I created the Astrology 101 workbook, which contains all the slides I'll be using. If you would like a copy, go on Amazon and put in Astrology 101 workbook or my name, Wendy Barta. If you're a Prime user, you get free shipping. Anyway, if you do decide to buy the book, I would recommend you wait until it arrives before you continue with the course. Thanks. The first thing we'd like to talk about is the astrology chart itself. Explain a little bit about the structure and organization of it. This will help you understand things as we go forward. So, what exactly is astrology? Astrology is an ancient study of how the position and path of celestial bodies have a bearing on our lives. This can take effect in many different ways. It can be done at a personal level, or it can be done at a more what they call mundane level. So you would have potentially a chart that would be cast for an individual person based on when they were born, or you could have a chart that's cast for a worldly event. It could include anything from politics to the stock market to the weather to natural disasters. Just about anything you can think of, you can cast a chart for. And this is one of the reasons that astrology is so fascinating to many, many people. For the purpose of this class, we're going to focus on natal astrology. That's the astrology for the individual person. I think it's often helpful for someone who's starting out to begin studying with their own natal chart. They understand themselves fairly well, and it really helps them understand the energies that we'll be learning about. Now, a natal chart is created using three very critical pieces of information: the date of birth, the time of birth, and the place of birth. While you can do readings with slightly inaccurate information, the best readings are done with accurate data. So try to endeavor to get as information as accurately as you can about the chart that you're creating. One thing that people often get confused about is that each chart is individual to a person. There are two examples here that show different types of charts. Each chart is unique to an individual, almost like a fingerprint. It's very important to understand this so you don't get confused as we go through the rest of the class. Now let's take a look at the anatomy of the chart. First thing you'll notice is that it's a circle. We'll talk more about that later when we get to the signs. But each of these charts is divided up into 12 houses. And in this diagram, it looks like they're the same size, but in reality, they're not. There are actually many different house systems that are used, and some applications tend to work better with one house system versus another, and the astrologer picks the one that's appropriate for whatever problem they're trying to look at. Between each house is a house cusp. It's important to know what the house cusp is because the sign on that house cusp will have an influence on how the house works in your chart. This is especially important when you're dealing with a house that doesn't have any planets in it. You'll notice that there are two lines that are dotted, going up and down and right and left. These are very critical angles that are on the first house, fourth house, seventh house, and 10th house cusps. To the far left is the ascendant or the rising sign, which is how people see us and what attracts them to us. Opposite it is the descendant, which is what we look for in partners or what we're attracted to. At the bottom of the chart is the nadir, the private personal side. And opposite it is the midheaven, your career or public side. We'll start our study of astrology by learning about signs. We'll also be covering planets and houses too, but let's start with signs first. To help you understand signs, I'll also cover elements: earth, air, fire, and water. There are 12 signs in the zodiac, and when you meet someone and they say, "What is your sign?" you're typically referring to someone's sun sign. We'll cover that plus others as we go further along. But the basics, let's start with signs first to give you an understanding of all the various energies and how they came up with them. Now let's take a deeper dive into the signs of the zodiac. Zodiac signs are named after constellations which are found along the ecliptic. The ecliptic is a great circle on the celestial sphere which represents the sun's apparent path around the Earth during the year. However, really, the sun is the center of our solar system, and the Earth goes around the sun, so it's really the Earth's path around the sun that helps define where the ecliptic path is. There are 12 signs in the zodiac, represented by the 12 constellations that are on that ecliptic circle. Each sign of the zodiac represents about 30 degrees out of the 360-degree circle that goes around the sun. So you don't find the signs of the zodiac very far from the ecliptic. The ecliptic goes through it. So in other parts of the sphere, you will not find the zodiac signs. Zodiac signs start at 0 degrees and go up to 29 degrees, 59 minutes, 59 seconds. And then you go into the next sign. Now let's talk about the symbols or the glyphs used to represent the signs. Some of these words should look more familiar to people. A person will say, "I'm a Gemini." What they're referring to is their sun sign is in Gemini. This is because we have many planets in the solar system, but we typically look at the sun sign to say what we are. As astrologers, however, we're going to look at all the planets in that person's chart, and all of those energies will help you really understand that person. As we start through, we don't begin at January 1st. We begin at the spring equinox, which happens around March 21st. So that's the beginning, and we start with Aries. Then we go through Taurus, then Gemini, and then around June 21st, we hit the summer solstice, which begins Cancer. Then we go through Leo and Virgo, and then the autumnal equinox is on September 21st, around there. Then we go through Scorpio, Sagittarius, and then around December 21st, we hit the winter solstice. Then we finish out the year with Aquarius and Pisces. For this first exercise, what is the sign of the sun? And what is the sign of the moon? Take a minute, figure it out, and we'll get together on the next slide. So, how did you do? The sign of the sun for this chart is in Aquarius. And the sign for the moon is in Leo. I'd like to talk about the ascendant or the rising sign for a minute. It's not a planet. It's actually a point on the chart that represents what was the sign on the eastern horizon at the time of your birth. Why is this important? It signifies how others see you, how you're seen by the world. So if you meet another astrologer, there's usually 3 things they immediately exchange. What is your sun sign? What is your moon sign? And what is the sign of your ascendant? Now let's make sure that you can find where your ascendant is on your natal chart. So in this exercise, I want you to look at the ascendant and try to determine what sign it is. For this chart, the sign of the ascendant is in Capricorn. Take a moment and look at your own chart and figure out what your ascendant is. A useful way of describing signs is by their element. There are 4 elements: fire, earth, air, and water. And every sign is categorized by one of them. So there end up being 3 signs in earth, 3 in air, 3 in water, and 3 in fire. Fire signs represent the energy of life and spirit. They're very dynamic, very energetic. Think of a burning flame. Earth signs represent substance or physical forms. Think of earth as being very grounded, very practical, very pragmatic. Air signs represent the mental and social realms. They're more about communications and interacting with people and thoughts. And water signs represent emotional and spiritual planes, how you feel about things. Water signs have that element of deep emotion and feelings. When I first began studying astrology, I read through a lot of books and I found the information somewhat overwhelming. Then I came across keywords, and it made things a lot easier for me and helped me learn a lot faster. So I have keywords developed for all of the houses, signs, and planets to help jumpstart the beginning students' understanding of astrology and to help with basic chart synthesis, which is in part 2. So we'll go through, and again, I've broken these out by element, and we will talk about each of the signs and some of the critical keywords that are associated with them. The first sign is Aries. One of the phrases people often use to represent Aries is I am, though as an Aries myself, I sometimes think it should be I do, because I tend to take a lot of action. Aries are assertive, brave, they like to initiate, they're impetuous, energetic, and self-oriented. Leo is another fire sign, and the key phrase associated with that is I will. Leos are creative, risk takers, they're charismatic, they're fun-loving, generous, and exciting. The third fire sign is Sagittarius, and its phrase is I understand. Sagittarius is benevolent, optimistic, extravagant, enthusiastic, and idealistic. Let's look at the earth sign keywords now. Taurus, the key phrase for that is I have. And Taurians like comfort. They're deliberate, dependable, placid, possessive, and very sensual. Virgo, I analyze. Virgos are work-oriented. They'll take painstaking attention to detail. They're efficient, pragmatic, exacting, and discreet. Capricorn, I use. Capricorns are responsible, they're formal, traditional, authoritative, and career-oriented. The air signs are the next group. The first one is Gemini, and its key phrase is I think. Geminis are fluent and versatile. They're curious and intermittent. They're clever and very nimble. Libra, I balance. Libras are cooperative, diplomatic. They'll sit on the fence. They're competitive and aesthetic. The last air sign is Aquarius. The key phrase is I know. Aquarians are unique, rebellious, futuristic, independent, inventive, and objective. The last group we'll look at are the water signs, Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. Cancer has a key phrase, I feel. Cancers are nurturing and warm, dependent, sympathetic. They're protective and very security-oriented. Scorpio, I desire. Scorpios are very penetrating, intense, and resourceful. They're very powerful and compulsive. Pisces, its key phrase is I believe. Pisces are emotional, intuitive, illusory, sensitive, spiritual, and compassionate. In this exercise, how many fire sign placements are found in this chart? How many earth sign placements are there? So how did you do? There are 2 fire signs in this chart, the moon and Pluto, over in the 7th house. There are 3 earth signs, Jupiter, Mars, and Mercury. Mars and Mercury are in the 12th house, and Jupiter is in the 8th. Now let's look for the air signs and the water signs. There are 3 air signs, Sun, Uranus, and Neptune. The Sun is in the 1st house, and Uranus is in the 4th house, and Neptune is in the 8th. There are 2 water signs, Venus and Saturn. Saturn is in the 6th house, and Venus is in the 2nd. For this exercise, let's see if we can find 3 or more planets in signs that are the same element. And if so, which element? How do you think this would influence the person? This chart has 2 different elements that have 3 or more planets in it, earth and air. Earth represents hard work, and air represents quick intellect. So you'd have a very smart person who's a hard worker. I'd like to take a minute and talk about natural astrology charts. A natural chart is perfectly aligned with every cusp starting a new sign, starting with the ascendant being in Aries at 0 degrees, Aries 0 minutes, 0 seconds. This is a perfect chart. It is very unique, and you don't typically find anybody that actually has it, but it's a really good chart to learn and memorize for training purposes. You're an astrology student, and I'm going to go through that in a little bit more detail on the next slide. This is an example of a natural chart. You notice that each of the house cusps starts perfectly with a new sign. Now, why this is good to memorize is that in learning astrology, you have 12 signs, 12 houses, and at least 10 planets and luminaries, all of which have characteristics associated with them that you need to understand before you can really understand a chart. Well, if you know that the 3rd house has Gemini characteristics, then that gives you a shortcut to understanding 3rd house energies. So it gives you less that you have to memorize, or at least it gives you sort of a heads up on what you can expect for the energies of the house. So there is a tie-in between the signs and the houses. So this is why I'm covering it here, where we just finished up signs, and then later on when we get to houses, you may start to see a little bit of the overlap between the 2. Now we're going to discuss the planets. One of the things that I should mention is that technically the sun and the moon are not planets. We call them luminaries, but when we talk about astrology, we often lump them in with the other planets. So it's not that we don't understand that, it's that it's just easier, and people sometimes just do that. So there are the historical planets that were known from ancient times, plus in the last few hundred years, we added Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. But the planets are broken out into really three categories of planets. What I call the personal planets, which are planets that talk a lot about you as an individual, your personality, how you deal with emotions, how you value things, how you receive and give love, things that are associated with you. Then there are the trans or the interpersonal planets, Jupiter and Saturn, and those planets deal with more interacting with other people. And Saturn is restrictions and Jupiter is expansion. Then the newer outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, are what we call the generational planets. And when you use those planets, you're looking at what has happened over a generation. They take a very long time to travel around the sun because they're so far out. So they're in a sign for a number of years. So that tends to have a generational impact on the chart. I hope you find the next section interesting. And the planets are very, very important because they really tell a lot about who you are and what your energies are. These are the 10 planets and luminaries that we're going to be studying in our basic introductory lectures. While there are other elements that are studied, such as asteroids and planetoids and fixed stars, we're going to keep it more simple and straightforward at the introductory level. And these are the primary things people look at. If you look at them here, we'll start with the sun. And the symbol or glyph that represents the sun is a circle with a small dot in the middle. The moon is represented by a crescent moon. Mercury has a little hat on top, and Venus and Mars are symbols that most people are fairly familiar with. Jupiter looks sort of like a number 4, and Saturn looks like an H with a line through it. Uranus is a series of interconnections there. It's a little hard to describe. I've seen it represented a variety of different ways, but that one's one of the more complex ones you'll just have to remember. Neptune looks like a trident, and Pluto has two representations. The one I have here is the one that's a little bit easier because it looks like a PL. Let's start with the first 3 personal planets, the Sun, Moon, and Mercury. The Sun represents your personality, your true self. It represents your creative endeavors, self-esteem, how you meet challenges, your big goals in life, and sometimes it represents your father. The Moon represents emotions, what you need to feel secure, what you're receptive to, what you're dependent upon, your drive to nurture, and in some cases, women or your mother. Mercury represents how you communicate, how you think, listen, and learn, your ability to learn, your perceptions and your logic, and your ability to information gather. The remaining 2 personal planets are Venus and Mars. Venus represents how you receive love and how you relate to others, how you attract what you want, art, beauty, refinement, how you feel about money or spend your money, devotion, and your female traits. It represents what you value. Mars is how you give love, how you express your energy, compete with others, get what you want, how you handle a crisis, experience conflict, your sexual energy, and your aggression. While the first 5 planets dealt more with you as an individual, the interpersonal planets, Jupiter and Saturn, deal more with how you interact with your environment, Jupiter is about expansion. How you expand your boundaries, explore new ideas, how you indulge yourself, your luck, your faith, your personal growth, and how you attract abundance. Saturn, the taskmaster, is how you meet limitations, deal with responsibilities, cope with your house placements, learn your life lessons, how you deal with discipline, how you carry your burdens, and how you deal with your karma. The last group of planets, the generational planets, were all discovered since 1781, so they don't really fall under any of the planets that were used in classical astrology. The first one, Uranus, was discovered in 1781, and it deals with individuality, innovation, inventiveness, sudden changes, humanitarian instincts, and anything future-oriented. Neptune, which was discovered in 1846, deals with the quest for oneness, idealism, intuition, imagination and fantasy, confusion, and compassion. The dwarf planet Pluto was discovered in 1930. It deals with transformation, intensity, sexual needs, resentment and forgiveness, and compulsions. For this exercise, identify the signs for the sun and the moon. Think about the different characteristics between the sun sign, your personality, and the moon sign. Comment on those. For this chart, the sun is in Aquarius and the moon is in Leo. The personality, as signified by the sun sign, is very independent. Emotions, as signified by the moon, are generous and people-oriented. Which planets are most associated with love and emotions? How do you think this influences this person by looking at their natal chart? The planets which are most associated with love and emotions are the Moon, Venus, and Mars. Love and emotions are well balanced in this chart between the Moon, which is Leo, fixed fire, Venus, Pisces, mutable water, and Mars, Capricorn, cardinal earth. This next section will be about houses. Houses tell you a lot of information about where energies will manifest in your life. The planets and the signs give you a lot of useful information, but it's often the house systems that help you fine-tune the exact ways that it manifests in your life. This is very, very helpful. Before we get started with what all the houses mean, let's just take a few minutes and review this chart from earlier in the class. Remember that the natal chart is a circle, and it is made up of 12 houses. There are house cusps between each of the houses, and we have 4 very important points: the ascendant on the first house cusp, the nadir on the 4th house cusp, the descendant on the 7th house cusp, and the midheaven on the 10th house cusp. We'll now spend some time going over more of the information that you'd learn by where things are placed in which house on your chart. Before we get started, I'd like to give you a simple framework to use for houses. There's a lot more detail to it than what I've got here, but I thought if I gave you some basics to think about, it would give you a better way of adding things onto it later as we go into more details in the later slides. A concept that I find useful is the idea of opposites. So, for example, the first house is about me, my personality. Opposite it is the 7th house, and that's you. Partnerships or spouses, relationships like that. The 2nd house is my stuff, my money, my things I value. Eighth house, which is opposite, is your stuff, other people's money, outside resources. The third house is about learning, K-12, lower school education, where the ninth house is about wisdom, higher education, and advanced training. The fourth house is your home. Opposite that, in the 10th, is your career. The fifth house is how you play and involves children. The 11th house is your friends and acquaintances. The sixth house is your work and your personal health, where the 12th house are your dreams. Another way of looking at the houses is by breaking them up into quadrants. Each quadrant has a different orientation. So quadrant 1, which is houses 1 through 3, is self-oriented and private. Quadrant 2, houses 4, 5, and 6, is relationship-oriented and private. Quadrant 3 is relationship-oriented and worldly and has houses 7, 8, and 9. And the fourth quadrant has houses 10, 11, and 12 and is self-oriented and worldly. If you look at the chart, you'll see that the line that goes from left to right is like a horizon line. And beneath the horizon, everything is private. It's actually the night side of the chart, as they call it. The day side of the chart is above the line, and there it's much more visible and worldly. The portion to the right-hand side of the chart is relationship-oriented, whereas the portions, the houses to the left-hand side of the chart, are more self-oriented. Let's look a little bit more at the first quadrant houses, those that have the characteristics of being self-oriented and private. The first house deals with you yourself, your identity and appearance, your personal actions and your instincts. The second house deals with your pleasures, your resources, the money you've earned, tangible beauty and comfort. And the third house deals with how you communicate, siblings, things in your local vicinity, transportation, and lower school learning. The second quadrant houses have the characteristics of being relationship-oriented and private. The fourth house deals with your home, your family, dependencies and nurturance, your roots and your parents. The fifth house deals with loved ones, children, speculation, risk-taking, and self-esteem. The sixth house deals with your work, especially on a daily level, employees, colleagues, and your personal health. The third quadrant houses have the characteristics of being relationship-oriented and worldly. The seventh house deals with marriage, partnerships, competition, visual beauty, and balance. The eighth house deals with sexuality, money from others, death and taxes, and the occult. The ninth house deals with education, especially higher level education, travel, the worldview, religions, values, and ideals. The fourth quadrant houses have the characteristics of being self-oriented and worldly. The 10th house is how you deal with authorities, reality, status, career, and duties. The 11th house deals with alternatives, friends, groups, causes, and progress. The 12th house deals with your higher self, the unconscious, the need for oneness, visions, dreams, and mental health. Identify the houses for the sun sign and the moon sign. What does this tell you about the focus of the life of that person? This individual has their sun in the first house. This usually indicates an independent person, an independent personality. Their moon is in the seventh house, which deals with relationships. So I would interpret this as an independent person who really feels that they emotionally wish to be in a marriage. For this next exercise, which planet is located on a house cusp? Which house cusp is it? What might this signify? The planet which is located on a house cusp is Saturn, which is on the sixth house cusp. This signifies a strong discipline to work. Remember, the sixth house is the house of work. Now, let's talk about modalities. Another way of looking at signs is by modalities. The modalities correspond to the seasons of the year. Each season lasts for 3 astrological signs. A cardinal sign represents the beginning of each new season. A fixed sign represents the middle of each season where things are very well established. And a mutable sign is the end of each season when the cycle is changing. This diagram illustrates the point I was making in the previous slide. If you start in Aries, it's a new season, so that's a cardinal sign. Then you move into Taurus, which is the middle of the season when everything is well established. That's a fixed sign. Then you go into Gemini. Gemini signals the change to the next season, so it's a mutable sign. You have the same pattern throughout. So Cancer is again a cardinal sign, Leo is a fixed sign, and Virgo is a mutable sign. And you start the season after that, the fall season, with Libra being a cardinal sign, Scorpio a fixed sign, and Sagittarius a mutable sign. And then finally you enter the winter season with Capricorn as a cardinal sign, Aquarius as a fixed sign, and Pisces as a mutable sign. Cardinal signs and their associated houses are associated with dynamic, energetic, proactive energy. People with a predominance of planets in cardinal signs or houses tend to be activity-oriented and initiate. There are 4 signs and 4 houses that are cardinal. Cardinal fire is Aries. Aries is usually the first one and is very known for directness. Cancer, cardinal water, represents motherhood, where we first learn nurturing that we receive, the initial nurturing. Libra, cardinal air, represents one-to-one relationships, basis of communicating and relating with others, how we relate to others. Cardinal earth is Capricorn, which is ambitious and driven to achieve status. Another thing to note about cardinal houses is that they occur with the first, fourth, seventh, and 10th house cusps. And if you'll remember from earlier, we talked about those cusps as being associated with the ascendant, the descendant, the nadir, and the midheaven. Another name for these are angular houses, and they'll sometimes use the term the angles, and they're referring to those 4 critical points that are defined with those 4 house cusps. They're probably used more in astrology interpretation than the other house cusps. Fixed signs and their associated houses are persistent, have perseverance, are stable, and resistant to change. This can be both a plus and a minus. The 4 signs associated with fixed signs are Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. And the 4 houses are the 2nd, 5th, 8th, and 11th. Taurus, fixed Earth, is known for being stubborn and inflexible, but very reliable. Fixed fire is Leo, very loyal and dedicated to ideals. Scorpio is fixed water, powerful, determined, can be jealous and controlling, but unstoppable when they really want something. And Aquarius is fixed air, logical and objective. They can also be very hard-headed and determined. Mutable signs and their associated houses can be flexible, changeable, adaptable, and suggestible. They have a talent for being in the moment and being able to shift direction. They're good at multitasking, but sometimes they can get a little bit scattered. Sometimes if there are a lot of mutable signs in a chart, you can have a nervous energy and have difficulty settling down. The signs associated with mutable signs are Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. And the houses associated with mutable signs are the 3rd, the 6th, the 9th, and the 12th. Gemini, which is mutable air, has mental flexibility to grasp new ideas. Virgo, which is mutable earth, serves where needed. Mutable fire is Sagittarius, has a talent for seeing the big picture in all the different situations. And Pisces, which is mutable water, is very sensitive to other people's feelings. This diagram shows a handy reference for cardinal, fixed, and mutable modalities. It shows the house and also the sign associated with them. I hope it's helpful. For this exercise, can you determine how many planets are in cardinal signs? How many planets are in fixed signs? And how many planets are in mutable signs? How did you do? There are 4 planets in cardinal signs: Saturn, Neptune, Mars, and Mercury. There are 3 planets in fixed sign: the Sun, the Moon, and Pluto. And there are 3 planets in mutable signs: Venus, Uranus, and Jupiter. This concludes Part 1 of Astrology 101, where we've covered signs, houses, and planets. Part 2, we'll talk about basic chart synthesis, and we'll build on the concepts that we covered here today. Thank you.